All right, so very good evening to everyone here. Again, my name is Moichan. Today I'm going to talk about the securities of layer 0 blockchain networks. This is perhaps the last talk of the NUS Fintech month. Yeah, so let's go right into the outline. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk about the layer 0. And the first part of the talk will be the background. What is a layer 0 blockchain networks? The second part of the talk will be the securities of layer 0 blockchain networks. What we are interested in. Next, we will go into one case studies, one particular research topic that I have been working on about partitioning attacks against Bitcoin networks. And finally, I will give my text on the future research and summarize the talk. So regarding the background on layer 0 blockchain networks, second, I have to admit a participant. Okay, so on the background, so you have been listening to the background in the previous talk in this series, but I will repeat. I will quickly introduce what is blockchains and the background on the blockchains. So you know that blockchains are linked list of block of own transaction. So basically, you have a block. Let's call it block N. Inside this block, you will have the headers, and also you will have a lot of transactions within the block. The transaction will be summarized using the Merkle tree data structures, and the root of the Merkle tree will be included in the headers. And then inside the header itself, it will contain the hash of the previous block headers. And this happens to be the same for every block. You have block n+1, you have inside the headers of the block n+1 will be the hash of the block n. And similarly for the block n+2. So if you think about it, it's very much like a linked list of the block. The reason why they have to do this is that when a malicious party want to, for example, modify the contents of block n, they will have to modify the content of the block n+1 and n+2 and so on, all subsequent block as well. And is really impossible in practice. And when it's come to blockchains, the entire blockchain data will be maintained by many distributed nodes. And you can take a look at this example. This is word map. And even let's just say there are many distributed nodes all over the world. And then all of them will maintain the same copies of the blockchains. And this is how this works. And every node will follow the predefined so-called setup rules and the consensus to agree on a single version of the blockchains. So basically, if you think about it, all nodes can generate different transactions, and then it can be divided into unconfirmed transactions, which are not in any block, and confirmed transactions that are included in a block. Typically, it will require some numbers of depth in the number of block. For example, if blockchain is six block. If that means if a block right there, if you have a transaction and that transaction is included in a block with 5 following block, then you can consider that transaction as confirmed. And then there's some special node in the systems. It's called miners that have a very special task to do is to generate a new block. So basically, they receive a lot of unconfirmed transactions, and then they will group them into block. And this node called miners. And what makes miners special is that they must own some sort of powers. For example, if in proof of work system, they must own some of the computational powers. And for the proof of stake system, they must own the digital currencies in order to become the one that generates a new block. And the incentive to become a miner, I think it's kind of obvious. Yeah, typically they will get the new coins from the new block, and also a transaction fee. So it's very interesting to note that the incentive here include both the new coin and the transaction fee, because in Bitcoin, the newly generated coin within a block is reduced every few years or so, and eventually they will be reduced into zero, and they will be only the transaction fee left. Okay, so I see your question in the chat. Do you have an estimate of how big the Bitcoin ledgers will get, or how hard it will be to run a node in the futures? That's a good question. So this is a very good question, and I got asked a lot. So basically, they are concerned where every node must maintain the same version of the blockchains, and eventually it will go a lot. It will cost you network, storage, everything. But there has been a lot of advance recently in terms of data storage, and you don't have to store like several hundreds of gigabytes. Sometimes you can prune the data. For example, the transaction that has been spent many years ago, you can delete them without any worry that you will lose some of the security guarantees. So yes, in the very, very long run, you will have to worry about the storage that you need to spend. But the current technologies guarantee that you will have a lot of many, many more years to come. So I would say it's quite sustainable at the moment. For example, if I have to put in terms of numbers, if you run a Bitcoin node right now, you only need a Pi device, and the storage of as less as 500 megabytes. So that's not a lot, right? You can really run it on the laptop or any commodities device. Now, does that answer the question, right? You can just put yes or no, or with a follow-up question. You can also unmute yourself, by the way. All right, cool. Let's move on. So I was talking about the miners. And then let's talk about a little bit about the consensus rules. So what make blockchains is the consensus rules. And at a very high level, you can consider that the consensus rules guarantee that only valid block and transaction are stored in the blockchains. And there are other rules that at least you should know about. Only one block at any height will be accepted. So it typically refers to as double spending. Double spending prevention. Basically, like if you have two valid blocks at the same height, you should accept only one block. And typically, the node will accept the block in the longer chains. So it can guarantee that there will be only one single blockchain remain eventually. So that's a high level of the consensus. And this talk, I will, get more of your attention into what under the hood. Basically, like if you think about it, actually Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies will rely on some sort of underlying communication networks for the data propagation. So we have a lot of nodes. How do they, talk to each other? So basically, in Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies, they connect their peer-to-peer networks. And when the new transaction or block are generated by one of these nodes, they will be propagated to every other node through the gossiping protocol. And if you don't know about gossiping, basically like you just forward to everyone, and if you until everyone hear about the new data. And then one thing to note about the data propagation in Bitcoin is that whenever you receive a block or transaction, you need to do some verification. So you will discuss the invalid data. You only accept the valid data before you forwarding it. And then There are a lot of note on the design of the networks. Is that sometimes, I mean, commonly it is classified into permissionless or permission. And permissions network mean you need to get some approval of the existing node before you can join the network. While permissionless mean you can free join or need at will. Really, in fact, Bitcoin, very, I would say it's a very good permissionless in the sense that the churn rate is so high that every day there will be 1,000 node join and 1,000 node left. So you can see they can really freely join the system. And in this talk, we mostly focus on permissionless network, mostly because the majority of the research on cryptocurrencies on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin permissionless. And for permission network, there's still, I would say, it's still an unknown land of wonder at the moment. And I will hope that in the future we can have more and more research in terms of permission network. Okay, so Gary asked a question that is unrelated to text. Do you think it's still preferable to run a Bitcoin node today? So I come to that later when I talk about one of the pros of the current layer 0 network. I come to that. All right, so I have introduced to you the consensus and the P2P network. So let's talk about what are the layers within the blockchain system. So if you remember nothing else from my talk, remember this slide, because that will give you the very overview, the first thing, the big pictures of the blockchain system that you want to know. So we already know about the blockchains, the block, and the chains of block. And there are many proposals or many works in terms of creating this concept. So it's we typically call it blockchain, or there are some proposals called side chains. You have a separate chain beside the main chains. And we also group the consensus mechanism into this layer. We call it layer 1. And then I already mentioned the networks, which is the permissions or permissionless. And typically we call it layer 0. Basically, this is communication networks. And it's worth to mention that besides the typical, the default peer-to-peer, like between two nodes to each other, it's very common that node will maintain a separate network. For example, the miners, the one that generate the block, typically they connect to each other through a separate network. It's called relay network. So whenever they file a block, because they do the mining, right? They file a block, and then they need to propagate it to many other nodes as fast as possible. So you can consider it's a group of elite nodes that connect like very connected to each other, and then they just broadcast the block very fast to each other. So it's called relay network. And did you also know that they use very high techy networks for Bitcoin? It's called satellite network. So that you can deliver the block through satellite. And then this has been advertised as highly available. This is very hard to attack against this kind of network, but it's still very expensive and is not commercialized yet at the moment. But it's good to know. And anyway, besides layer 1 and layer 0, you may also heard about layer 2, which is payment network or state channel. And one very popular example of this layer is Lightning Network. And personally, I really think that Lightning Network will be the like with Lightning Network is Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will have mass adoption, because it have more and more people get to the blockchains. So typically we call this layer 2. So layer 2. Okay, so I visit a question. So layer 1 is built on top of layer 0. That is correct. So so it built on top. I mean, I couldn't say it built, but basically it rely on layer 0. And I come to that in the very next slide. All right. So I was talking about layer 2. So in case you want to learn more about layer 2 is defined as basically any system that allows transaction between two users. They are medium, basically not directly on layer 1, but depends on layer 1. So for example, if you pick payment network, so basically that is the two users directly talk to each other and they do the micro payment. For example, you don't want to use you don't want to send a Bitcoin transaction when you buy a cup of coffee, right? Because the transaction fee like few $100 already, but you want to do some micro payment, and then you can with the payment network you can do so. You can enable very fast, very micro payments, but then the security guarantees will be the security will be guaranteed based on the securities of layer 1. So that is the definition of layer 2. And then there one more layer that we as a researcher we know about it, but it doesn't receive much attention like other layers. But I just put here for the comprehensiveness. And is it called the hardware layers? So typically this is just the hardware. The the Intel ASIC, the trusted execution environment, which is used to enable the many other protocol in other layers. And it's just unfair to classify the hardware layer into any of other layers. So typically we put it in other layers. So in this talk we focus on layer 0. Okay, and we must we also need to know why the securities of layer 0 blockchains matter. So I realize these analogies of this system of this system, and then you can consider all fancy complex system. Here are all blockchain innovation in the last 10 years. But then if you look at the bottom part of it, you see this is the layer 0 research. And because I have been working on this, I feel it's I don't know what to say, but we don't see many research on research and innovation in layer 0. And most of the networks now are still using or being inspired by the very designs of Bitcoin, which has been there like for 10 years. There are not many innovation at layer 0. And the reason why we need to care about the securities of layer 0 is that typically the security guarantees of one layer depends on lower layer. So there were a question on whether layer 1 is built on top of layer 0. They are separate layers, but the security guarantees of layer 1 will depends on layer 0. And I will give you some example. For example, if you talk about the reliance from layer 2 to layer 1, I have one example with that. When the payment channel want to close, but the miners at layer 1 reject the settlement transaction, then it cannot close. And to give the example why, I mean, how the layer 1 rely on layer 0, basically you can come up with this this example. So basically, if the layer 0 in the layer 0, if the network is split into two parts, then you cannot have one single blockchain because two parts may have different blockchains. Okay, so to answer your question, it's not built on top, but it rely on. Okay, does that answer your question, David? I think. Can you type in yes or no, or do I have to elaborate more on that point? Okay, sure, no problem. Yeah, so it's I mean, you can also consider it as OSI level. So everything be on top of each other, but they relying on each other. Okay. All right. So that is for the background. So let's talk about the securities of layer 0 blockchain networks. In this section, I will give you the overview, the big pictures, like what's going on there. And feel free to stop me anytime. So if you want to do securities in these areas, this is a good starting point because I will give you some of the very interesting keywords that have been around in these areas. All right, so there are a few topics, and I divide into 3 points. We see the block propagation, the transaction propagation, and the topologies of the network. Because if you think about it, there are, I mean, it's everything, right? Because they use the peer-to-peer network to deliver the block, the transaction, and the result will be the topology itself. Okay. In terms of block propagation, there is some concerns on the denied delivery. I will tell you why the block propagation may cause some attacks called selfish mining, and maybe this may interest you, Gary, about the incentive. And then in terms of transaction propagation, we are worried about the denial service attacks, some censorship attacks, and the privacy concern. For the network peer-to-peer topologies, we care about the peer discovery, mapping the network, and some eclipse attacks. Yes, I really think that Harry, right? There will be the record will be available on YouTube. All right, talk to you later. Yeah, there's some challenge on the block propagation. So when, for example, the delay deliveries, so when the block delivery is delays, there will be a lot of problem. Sometimes it's not exact. It's happened just simply because the block data in last. There's some latency on the networks or churns. Churns mean the node joins the network or leaves the network. So you just consider this. So for example, if you are the node at NUS, and then your only peers or neighbors are node at NTU, for example, and then the node at NTU will connect to the rest of the world. I don't know why I come with this example, but that's an example. Okay, so the churns happen when the node at NTU, for some reason, they have the network down or something like that. They cannot deliver the block to you. And for that reason, you are late in the view of the blockchain compared to the rest of the world. And it just happened, not because of the attack, but it just happens. Okay, but also it can happen if the attacker is in the man in the middle position, and then they can purposely delay block deliveries. And there have been some attacks that really do this. And the one that in a real good man in the middle position, can you guys guess? I will pause like for 10 seconds to see if anyone can guess what could be the man in the middle attackers that can delay the block or delay the data. If anyone has the answer, can type in. Okay, the question is that I mean between the peer-to-peer, right? The peer, okay, minus. So between two peers, you will between two peers, you will send a block, and some of them will purposely delay the block deliveries. Many the bidders. All right, so I see two answers on the minus, but surprisingly, you should look even deeper than that. And the man in the meters we see in a real good position. Yeah, layer zero. So what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes the internet service providers can purposely delay the block for whatever reason, and there have been some attacks like this. For example, if you are the user of Singtel, and Singtel, for whatever reason, don't want you to involve in Bitcoin, and then they can really easily sort out the data based on the port numbers, and then can delay it. So that quite surprising attacker, right? All right, so another concern that we may have is the selfish mining, and this may relate to the answers come from Gary and David. Sometimes the miners do not release the new block immediately because they have to work on the listed block, and the attacks here is that they keep the block for themselves, and then they don't release it to other, so that they can gain some advantage in mining the next block. And also, one of the challenges that we have is that typically there is no incentive for non-miner node to propagate the block. So this is related to the question that Gary asked earlier. What is it beneficial to run a node at the moment? So first of all, if you are the miners, if you participate in the mining process, for example, you join a mining pool, then surely in the long run, you will earn something. But if you are not the miners, then typically you don't have any incentive at all to run the node and maintain the network, because you have to cost the bandwidth, cost the storage. Actually, they typically have no incentive at all. But I mean, when that happens, the peer-to-peer network will become more and more centralized, because they will only the miners who run the node, right? But then what happens in practice is somewhat surprising, in the sense that at least in Bitcoin, there are still like more than 10,000 nodes are running, or so. I mean, more than 10,000 nodes are running, and most of them run for nothing. They run for goodwill. They run for decentralization, and that's what happened. But it doesn't happen to many other cryptocurrencies. I remember there are some incidents in smaller cryptocurrencies, because there are not many nodes, so it's very easy for the attackers to become the majorities of the entire network. But anyway, that is the interesting question to ask in the long run: how to incentivize the node to run, to make the network more healthy. Okay, so this is the challenge in the block propagation. We'll move to the challenge in the transaction propagation. So transaction propagation can be abused for denial of service attacks. For example, the attacker can flood the transaction to the network, because all the node will propagate the transaction, right? You think about it: if the attacker send out one transaction, but then for the entire network of 10,000 nodes, 10,000 nodes will have to receive and propagate the transaction. And to prevent this from happening, At least in Bitcoin, they limit the transaction to have at least some certain amount of fee. It means that the attacker will need to spend a lot of money to flood the network. Basically, they are raising the bar for the denial of service attacks. Yeah. So, so typically, to enable this attack, they will need to sacrifice the minimal transaction fee. All right, and another concern from the transaction propagation is that transaction can be censored or not propagated, because for some rogue miners, they can just do not include the valid transaction in the new block, and because the miners earn the money from the fee, they may choose to not propagate the transaction with high fee to other miners. And another concern for transaction is that the origin of the transaction can be de-anonymized. Sorry about that. And the typical way to do so is that the transaction can be grouped together and linked to the IP address. And then when it's happened, basically there's no privacy net. Imagine that you have a lot of Bitcoin, but then everyone know that you have Bitcoin. Everyone know that what you spend, then it would be pretty bad. All right, so we have talked about the block propagation and transaction propagation. Now we will talk about the peer-to-peer network topologies challenge. And for example, the first question we may have is that how a peer can discover other peers when it's first joins the network, right? And currently in Bitcoin, they hard code some of the node into the code as a first point of contact. So whenever you first join the network, you will go to this node. In Ethereum, they use distributed hash table. So you can see that the problem with both of the top two cryptocurrencies is that this method is not fully decentralized, and sometimes you cannot even find any point of entry to the network. Another question is how can the developers can prevent the mapping the full network topologies? Because if you reveal the full network topologies, then sometimes the attacker can exploit that, can see what is the influence node in the network, and then it can focus to attack that node. And finally, last but not least, we have the, okay. So David, I have a question. If everyone knows on AWS and Google is still safe, given that is it very centralized? So the answer is no. Is it not safe? Is it really not safe? And unfortunately, that is the case at the moment. Half of the nodes are on popular cloud. One of our studies show that like between the first 5 cloud, amazingly, it's not Google. It's AWS, DigitalOcean, Hezro, Alibaba. That you will see a lot of Bitcoin node right there. And yeah, I remember there is some study they show that like only 5 major cloud service providers own more than half the Bitcoin network. And at the moment, we cannot do anything about that. That's a personal choice. So yeah, that's one thing that we should be worried about. Okay, Ray asked a question: which challenge do you think MEV is exploiting? Minor exploitable value? Is that what you are saying? So okay, so that is the very good question to ask, because that is a very recent research. I think it's I mean the research is last year or 2-year top. Okay, so MIV is more or less on the transaction propagation. So you remember that I put in the previous slide when I put the miner do not propagate the transaction with high fee to other miners. So we can consider this one sort of the MIV, minor extractable value. So whatever is beneficial for you, you keep it for yourself. So we can consider it as a one of the channel as a Janssen correlation. And to get out of that situation, perhaps you should come up with a better scheme for the Janssen correlation. That's what I would answer. And does that answer the question? All right, cool. All right, so let's move on. So I was talking about the P2P channels. And the last part of the P2P challenge, which is the focus of the rest of the talk, will be the Eclipse attacks that split the P2P network, because there will be many other consequences, such as the consensus cannot be reached, or the user cannot operate on the transaction. And this will be the case study that we will focus on. All right, let's talk about partitioning attacks. And I will use Bitcoin as a case study. Okay. So we already know the Bitcoin P2Ps. They are blockchains. Within the blockchain, you have Janssen, and you have the consensus rules. It's going to rely on the P2P network. But I want you to focus a little bit further than that, which is the routing network that you should know from the network class. So all the clouds, small clouds here are the autonomous system, or AS in short. And you can even think it about the telcos. Okay. In Singapore, we have a few. Compared to the rest of the world, it's not that big, but yeah. Okay, so under the hood here, you can see even the peer-to-peer network also rely on even deeper layers called routing network. Okay, and then when it comes to the securities of the peer-to-peer network, and partitioning attacks are either one of the more interesting one. The definition of the partitioning attacks is to isolate one or more nodes from the rest of the network. So you have the victim on the left-hand side and the rest of the Bitcoin network on the right-hand side. The adversary in partitioning attacks will, for some reason, somehow will isolate the victim on the left-hand side. And when that happens, the adversary can arbitrarily drop, deny, modify, or insert any message. Okay. And you may ask, why the adversary do so? So I will give you one classical example of the partitioning attacks, which is a double spending attacks. Okay, so consider we have the merchants, the car merchant on the right left-hand side, and you have the Bitcoin network on the right-hand side. So in the double spending attacks, the attacker, in this example, will pay the merchant with a transaction. Let's say the transaction is 10 Bitcoin for Lamborghini. Yeah, I don't know how much is a Lamborghini, but yeah, we are giving an example. All right, and the attacker will also at the same time using the same coin from A to pay herself another 10 coins. So in this example, the attacker owns the address A and address C. Okay, and then the attacker will at the same time will try to mine or wait for end block to be confirmed. And at the same time, the merchant will send a card to the adversary. And then the rest of the network will accept the transaction on the right side, we from A to C, and discuss the transaction from A to B. And when this happens, the attacker gets the Lamborghinis for 0. All right. Another motivation for the partitioning attacks is that let's consider a hypothetical scenario when the attacker has already had 40% of the mining powers, and the attacker can partition the rest of the network into two halves, 30% and 30%. And then for that to happen, the attacker can outcompete its partition miners, even with 40% of the mining power. So you see what happens here, right? Because the attacker blockchain will become the longest one. And not just these two examples, there will be many other attacks, follow-up attacks that can be done when the partitioning attack already successful. For example, it can be service mining. It can, as a short scale, smaller scale, you can censor the transaction, and you can also attack the layer 2 protocol, because inherently, when you attack the layer 0, you can attack layer 1 and you can attack layer 2 as well. All right, so do you think whether is it just a on paper attack? Actually, partitioning attack actually happened in 2020 and against Monero. So Monero, in case you didn't know, this is a very popular cryptocurrency. It has quite a similar P2P design to Bitcoin. And then what happened is that the attacker, for some reason, intercept some of the node transaction and then drop them, so that many Monero users cannot send out the transaction. So this is one of the example of partitioning attacks, and then you censor the transaction. And luckily, the damage is not that huge, because the attackers fails to completely partition the victim. All right, so let's talk about how actually partitioning attacks work. How do you partition a Bitcoin node or similar cryptocurrencies? So the existing work can be grouped into two strategies. First of all, is that you influence the victim to connect to the adversary control peers. And there are two examples, which is the Eclipse and the Airbus attacks that I will talk later. And the second strategy is that the adversary can place herself. So you don't control any node. You just simply place yourself in your own legitimate peering connection. All right, so I think I have slightly more than 10 minutes left. So I will quickly go through the three attacks at a very high level. All right, so the first attack that I want to introduce is Eclipse attacks. This is this comes from an UC Securities 250 paper, and in the threat model, the attacker here control about 3,000 IP addresses, and the attacker goal is to use the first strategy, which is to influence the victim to connect to like some of the 3,000 IP address that the attacker control. And there are a few assumptions, but basically the victim must have a public IP address, and the victim must run some older version. And to understand these attacks, you must understand how the Bitcoin node found the P2P networks. And a Bitcoin node can establish 8 outgoing connection to each to other peers. And the outgoing peer can be selected from the internal peer database. It's called address managers, ADM-man. And it's also accept up to 117 incoming connection from other peers. And only the full node with public IPs can accept incoming connection. So this is a necessary condition for the Eclipse attack to work. And we can skip through the introduction of the address propagation and storing address inside Bitcoin, how it's work. But at a very, very high level, the attacking step include filling the two tables with the internal database of the Bitcoin node with the IP address, and then try to restart the victim and occupy all incoming connection of the victim. And when this happens, the selected outgoing peers, the outgoing peers, which are selected from the tables, will be filled with adversary IPs. So basically, the adversary will occupy all incoming and outgoing peers of the victim. And when this happens, the Eclipse attack is successful. There have been some vulnerabilities in the software that have been exploited. I will skip this because this is very much details of the attacks. But there one message that you should remember about the number of IPs that the attacker need. So back then, 2015, you only need like 3,000 botnet to attack a Bitcoin node, and basically it's not that expensive to run 3,000 IPs. Okay, and since then many countermeasures has been deployed, and all of them have been implemented in Bitcoin actually. And at the moment, the accused attack doesn't work anymore. Okay. All right. For the second attack, it's called Biscoin hijacking attack. It's come from a very prestigious conference. It's called ICW-SNP 2017. And the threat model is that the attacker here is a telco, your network attacker is an internet service providers. And the attacker goes to use a second strategy, which is to intercept all Bitcoin coins of the victim. And the assumption here is that the attacker can do BGP hijacking attacks, and the victim IP we need to belong to some hijackable prefix, I would say, which is a prefix that's shorter than STAR24. So the attack steps are quite simple. In this example, the node on the left-hand side and the right side connect to each other through the Bitcoin connection in the blue color, and the attacker will wish to split the network into two disjoint components. And basically, the attacker can intercept the traffic going through the right side using the BGP hijacking attacks. I wish not to repeat what is the BGP hijacking attacks, but basically the attacker can intercept the traffic going through the Bitcoin node on the right side. And when that happens, the attacker can simply, when that happens, all the traffic coming from the left-hand side to the right side will be intercepted and will go through the attacker. And the attacker can simply drop on the Bitcoin traffic to create a partition. And it's good to note that there's some connection cannot be intercepted, such as the node within the same AS, like node A and node B in this example, and some miners within the same mining pool because they have some private connection. And regarding the attack effectiveness and practicalities, mostly I will skip through this, but the attack is feasible. But the takeaway here is that we don't see this attack in practice because the attack can be quickly detected, and it actually happened in 2014. So they won ISP in Canada. They hijacked the traffic through some mining pool, and they steal about $80,000 worth of Bitcoin back then. I don't know how much it's worth now, but I guess it's or not. Okay, so motivated by these attacks, which mean I and my collaborators come up with the Airbus attacks, which is a much stealthier partitioning attacks against Bitcoin. And okay, I don't have much time left, but basically we have the same capabilities as the second attack, but the strategy will be similar to the first attack. Okay, and the ideas here is that the attacker AS here, we try to partition the victim node on the left hand side, and we have the a lot of routing path from the victim node to all other ASs, and then you can see that the traffic from the victim node to any IP address at ASC and ASD will travel through the attackers. So we call all the IPs belong to ASC and ASD here as the silo IPs. And with the silo IP, the attacker actually can spoof the connection with the victim on behalf of the silo IP. And for that, the attacker can we say we virtually control the shadow IPs. Okay, and in our study, we find that there are a lot of the IPs, shadow IPs as variables. Typically, there are millions of them, and also they are very well distributed all across the world. And okay, so the strategy is similar to the first attack when we slowly occupy all the peers of the victim node. And I wish I had more time to introduce the attack to you guys, but for the sake of time, you can contact me to learn more about these attacks. Or I also have talk available regarding these attacks on my website. So let me try to skip the details of attacks and then go into the summary of the 3 attacks. Okay. So basically, for the botnet-based Eclipse attacks, the attack at the moment is impossible. And for the second attack, the attacks is detectable. So it's unlikely that you see this attack in practice. But for the third attack, it is much stealthier and harder to prevent. And this is, I would say, this is the state of the art at the moment, still at the moment, and it's very hard to see whether we can see this attack in practice. All right, for the last few minutes, I will try to talk about the future research in this field and summarize the talk. So there are a couple of research directions for the blockchain network securities. I divide into 3 parts, which is the defense, attacks, and extension. For the defense, one way to work against the partitioning attacks is to provide some cross-layer defense strategy, which means you can combine all the defense possible from layer 1, layer 0, and even lower than that at the routing layers. And one possible research direction is to come up with some theoretical based P2P designs that is by design robust against the partitioning attacks. And in terms of attacks, people will always come up with the new attack strategies. And we also should extend our knowledge from permissionless network into permission cryptocurrency as well. And for the extension of the existing attack, we can also work on what is the possible follow-up attack against other layers, which is layer 1 and layer 2. And some implication for the privacy when the partitioning attacks happens. And I can say to you guys that there is already some new paper on these 3 research directions. So I made this slide, I think this time last year. And at the moment, we already see 3 new papers on this exact 3 research directions. So I would say there are lots more to be done, and see a quite exciting direction to pursue if you are into research. All right, to summary, the first takeaway that you may have is that the blockchain rely on the security guarantees of the underlying networks at layer 0, and partitioning attacks are a great example of how network adversary can attack the consensus or the transaction layers. And finally, network security of blockchain is a very promising research direction, and I hope that some of you can learn more and then going more into this direction if you want to do research. And yeah, for that I conclude the talk. Thanks so much for staying and for listening to the talk. I think we still can have a few more quick questions if you want to.
So if anyone has any questions, you can just put them in the chat, or if you want, you can even unmute and just ask them out. Yeah, we'll just have another like 5-10 minutes of questions. If there's any questions, that is. If not, this will be the end of this talk. Oh, sorry. There's a question
Oh
from David.
yes,
Yeah.
I expected this question. Okay, are there difference between layer zero blockchain, a variable such as Cosmos and Polkadot? So for the entire talk, I mentioned about all of the research recently in the areas, and I didn't really touch any industries outside of academic work. And prior to this talk, I also Google up a bit about layer zero, and then I realized that many of the cryptocurrencies, it's not many, there are few cryptocurrencies claim that they are providing layer zero, and their layer zero provide the service for some other ecosystem as well. But still, if you look at the paradigm that I put earlier here, actually they are still layer one, because there are some still consensus mechanism between them, and they are not layer zero when it comes to this paradigm. Yep. And there one trick to see really whether it's layer zero is that whether it's include the internet layer as a OSI model as well. Okay. All right. Hope that answers the question. My pleasure. And as always, you can always. Okay, Alison asked a question. Did you whether it's profitable to run a Bitcoin node? Okay, so in Bitcoin system you have two types of node. Whether you are miner, you are not miner. Sorry, the camera here. Okay, let me bring the chart here. So whether you are miner or you are not the miners. If you are the miners and you are joining some mining pool, and in the long run you will make some profit. But if you are not the miners, you are actually joining the network and spending your bandwidth storage for free. And in fact, many of the nodes at the moment are doing it for goodwill. They want to do it for decentralization. And if you think about the big picture, right? If you can maintain a very good and healthy network, it may indirectly affect you in some way. For example, if you are running an exchange service, right? You also want to run a Bitcoin node because you want to catch up with the transaction and the block as fast as possible. You don't want to rely on any other node. And for example, if you are owning a lot of Bitcoin and you want the Bitcoin to be healthy, then you have like non-monetary incentive to run the Bitcoin node. But other than that, I would say there are not much profit. Okay, Alison, does that answer the question? All right, cool. All right, any other question? What do you think about Solarland proof of history? To be honest, I'm not aware of Solarland. So yeah, I should begin this talk with a disclaimer that I mean try to keep this within the academic one only. But yeah, there are so many cryptocurrency out there. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of everything. Do you know that there are like several thousand of cryptocurrency right now? Yeah. All right, I guess it's 10:05. Thanks again, everyone, for spending the Friday night with me. I really hope that you had a enjoyable times, and hopefully you learned something. Please contact me anytime for any discussion or question. I could very happy to talk to you about blockchain.
Yeah, and I think with that, we have come to the end of this particular talk. I would just like to thank Mohit Ren for taking his time out on this Friday evening and coming down to teach us more about this specific topic, which is coming up in the space right now. And as well as I also like to thank the participants for coming down on a Friday evening as well. And we hope that this has furthered your interest in crypto and has allowed you to learn a bit more about this topic itself. Yeah. And I think if there's no further questions, then you can feel free to leave, and then we will end in the call shortly. Yeah. So thank you once again.